So welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Dr. Grace Telesco, and I am from NSU, Abraham Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. I'm a full-time faculty member there. I am wearing I had surgery. So if you're wondering what in the world is this gladiator thing with the blue line, it's just kind of holding up my sling. But I am so excited about tonight's show and tonight's program. It's a webinar and we're live streaming the webinar. I have with me two very important guests, Dr. Catherine Ramsland and Professor Sharon Plotkin, soon to be Dr. Sharon Plotkin. And she is a professor full-time at Miami-Dade College. And Dr. Ramsland is a world-renowned author and forensic psychology professor. And I'm just gonna like stop talking and let them introduce themselves and what they're excited about in terms of this program tonight and what they're going to share with us. One of the things that Dr. Catherine Ramsland is known for, besides all of the other things that she's known for, is her interviews with the BTK killer and her book, one of 60 books, Confessions of a Serial Killer. So tonight I asked her to come back. Her and Sharon had been with us on a program, I don't want to say last year, but maybe 6-7 months ago, something like that. And we did do Confessions of a Serial Killer, and we were kind of focused on some of the work that Dr. Ramsland had done with the BTK killer. Tonight, we're going to be really looking at how do you catch a killer? And so that is the title of tonight's webinar. And we have 127 participants, plus we're live streaming this on YouTube, on our YouTube channel at NSU. And with no further ado, I am going to invite Professor Sharon Plotkin and Dr. Catherine Ramsland onto the webinar. And I'm going to let you guys take it away. Take it away. Tell us a little bit about you, and then dive right in. Thank you again, both, for being here.
Welcome. Go ahead, Sharon.
Sure, Dr. Ramsland. You are a hard act to follow, so thank you for letting me go first. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the Alpha Phi Sigma NSU session tonight. My name is Sharon Plotkin, and I have been a crime scene investigator for 21 years in Miami, and had the most amazing opportunity to work with some amazing dynamic people in the industry, including the fact that I have had contact with and been to forensic meetings with Dr. Catherine Ramsland, which is where we met. And I'm so proud to be here tonight from a crime scene perspective in our session this evening. So welcome and thank you for having me.
Okay, and as they've said already, I'm Dr. Catherine Ramsland. I teach at DeSales University. And one of the books that the current 68 that I've written was about the BTK killer. And we're actually going to be looking at that case more in depth tonight in terms of the crime scenes and processing physical and psychological evidence. I teach a course on death investigations and also a course on serial killers and forensic psychology. So we're going to kind of combine some of that. I'll talk about the case. If you saw some of this before, there will be some overlap, but this is much more about how do we figure out how to link these crimes, how to investigate them, what are some of the things we would be looking for that would help us to catch someone like this. And one of the most recent book that I did publish is called How to Catch a Killer, and it's 30 cases of serial killers. And this is definitely one of them because of the way he was caught after 30 years. So a tough case because it was hard to link these crimes together. But I will go quickly through the case, showing you some of the crime scene photos from the BTK task force in Wichita, and then Professor Plotkin will talk to you about how do you analyze this stuff, and then I'll come back in with more of the behavioral analysis. So with that, let me share my screen. All right. Does that look all right to everybody? Did you see that? All right.
Yes, it looks great.
All right. So we're looking at a specific set of crime scenes for this particular. And I don't really talk a lot about the victims by name. We're going to look at them more by number. Most of you think that BTK, if you know the case, had 10 victims, and that's true. He had 10 murder victims, but there was an attempted murder as well. And I'm going to include that because that was important in one of the scenes. So we have 6 crime scenes. For all of that, we have a number of items, bindings, knots, methods of entry, location, weapons, wounds, victim type, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's unique behavior. And that's the part that helps us with linking crimes and also understanding motivation. We had one witness report, so that was good because that gave us a description, not that it caught him, because it didn't. We have killer communications, that is what caught him. And then also the fact that he kept journals, drawings, maps, codes, things like that, helps us to better understand him. So that's the overview, and we can get back to that, but essentially this was the first crime in January of 1974. He had prepared for this, scoped out the house. He didn't prepared well because his family actually had 3 other kids that he didn't know about, as well as a dog that he didn't know about. But he did barge his way into this house. He used what he called a ruse, which by that he meant a ruse, that he was a fugitive on the run because it's a way to put them at ease, and then proceeded to strangle each of the members of this family. And then when the little girl revived, he took her to the basement and hanged her. The whole point for him was the binding, keeping victims under control, because that was a sexual part of this crime for him. So he knew a lot about knots, both from Boy Scouts as a kid and also from his military work. So he had some favorite knots, and one is the clove hitch knot, but he had others as well. This wasn't the only one, and that's partly what made this difficult. So we'll get to that. One of the things he did that nobody figured out, but he just talked about it later, was he sweat a lot at these crime scenes. So he took a glass out of the cupboard after he had murdered everybody and drank from it and then put it back in. And he thought this was kind of interesting. So he ended up doing this at most of the other crime scenes. So it was kind of his secret signature, and this is the way he thought of it. Not that any of the police ever figured out that he had done this, but I think today, certainly that could be different. About 3 months later, the 5th victim plus her brother, he attacked both of them. He entered the house, waited, thought she lived there alone, but her brother came in. He shot the brother twice. The brother survived. So that from that, we got a witness report. But this time he used a different weapon. He did put a ligature around her throat, but he actually stabbed her, fatally stabbed her. So linking an entire family that were all asphyxiated by strangulation to a stabbing death and a shooting attempted murder, there just wasn't really any behavior at the time that made any sense. So these 2 incidents were not linked. They weren't that far apart, just a few blocks, but they just didn't seem to have any connection at all. But there was a description of him, which I'll get to, and there were knots used on the binding of her, and it was a granny knot, not a clove hitch knot. So because of the differences in knots, and he had actually used something from the home to bind her rather than with the family, he had brought in what he was going to use. So there were enough differences that the police thought these just don't look like the same. And that's the clove hitch was the one he used on the family murders. This was her bedroom. where he had tried keeping her and her brothers separate. She was in this bedroom and her brother was in a different one. This is what the brother claimed to have seen. He was able to give police a description, and in fact put himself in danger by doing so, because Rader had thought about looking up where he lived and eliminating him as a witness. But basically it wasn't a great description. As you can see, it's okay, but they never did link it to Dennis Rader. So I guess, it wasn't very good. A few months later, when the police arrested 3 men for the murder of the family, Rader did not like to know this, because he didn't like them misspending his tax dollars on the wrong pursuit, and he also didn't want others taking credit for what he had done. So this begins to show us something about him. He wrote a letter, put it into an applied engineering mechanics book, put that in the library, and sent a note to a reporter at the Wichita Eagle to go look for it. So we already can kind of see this sort of play-like cat and mouse behavior on his part. And this is the letter. It's a lengthy letter from a typewriter, but it's a copy of the letter. He didn't send originals, and talks about details about the family murder that only the killer could possibly know, and claims credit for it, and says no one was with him, that the 3 guys that they picked up are not the guys, and they should immediately release them. So then some time goes by, and that's March 1977. So that's about 3 years. And victim number 6, who was not a victim he had surveilled, stalked, or even knew anything about. He had no idea who even lived in this house, but he had gone to the door of a different woman that he had expected to come to the door, but she didn't. And he was all dressed up, and he had an opportunity that afternoon to kill someone, so he wasn't going to let that go by. And so he followed a little boy into this house. And so again, he uses a ruse to get in, like he's looking for someone. And once he gets in, then he puts, and there are 3 kids in there, he puts them in the bathroom and binds their mother in this bed. And so what you see here is the kinds of bindings. Now, part of this comes from her place, and part of it is duct tape and some cord that he brought in. But often he would look through drawers to find something like pantyhose or something like that that he could use, or scarves to bind the victims. So that's also behavior. Why didn't he just use what he brought? He liked rifling through drawers and taking underwear. He then also adds to his communication stash by writing this poem. Her name was Shirley. So he writes a poem based on Goldilocks and sends this. It gets lost. He then sends another letter asking why haven't they published this in the newspaper? And then they found it in the dead letter file. The next victim is in December. So it was March, and now it's December. So a lot of time has gone by again. And this is a woman he specifically selected because he saw her at her mailbox. She was blonde, petite, lived alone in this duplex, and nobody was on the other side. So he knew he could get away with this one. In this case, again, he entered first, knowing her routines, expected her to come home at a certain time, and he was there to surprise her. He went in through a back window. And they talked for a while, actually, and she asked him if he could let her use the restroom, which he did, and then asked if she could keep her sweater on, which he let her do. So there were a lot of odd behaviors on his part, but in the end, he did strangle her. So then in this case, we have new behavior. He does not want to let this murder go because he considers it to be the one where nothing went wrong. He did exactly what he wanted to do, and he wants her to be discovered because he wants to see it talked about in the local TV station and in the newspaper. So he calls it in. So this gives us some physical evidence in terms of his voice, as well as the phone booth that he used to call it in. he then starts again with this sort of cat and mouse by sending letters. And he had a favorite TV station, KAKE, or Cake TV is what they called it. And you can see the return address is Cake Man, something he made up, which he would do every time he made these communications. But the interesting thing, he's not communicating with the police, he's communicating with the media and expecting them to take this to the police, but he wants first to have them know what he wants to say. And he talks about being among the elite serial killers. By this time, he's already suggested various names that they should call him because he doesn't want to leave anything to chance. And he begins to tell them things about himself, that things like serial killers are motivated by what he calls factor X, which is different for each one of them. He makes this drawing of victim number 7 and claims he hasn't received the media attention he deserves. And so he is now looking for the next victim, victim number 8. This is a poem that he wrote about victim number 7. It is based on like a folk song, but he always would do this. And you see, he now has the hangman's knot. So he's varying the whole thing with knots. He has square knots, clove hitches, bowline, hangman. These are things that he learned how to do in the military and the Boy Scouts. And so he likes to try that out because binding is everything for him. Now, a long time goes by. It's April 1985. This is a woman who lives about 4 houses down the block from him. He has a set of rules where he will not take victims near home, but all of a sudden he just decides, he sees his hands around her neck. This is a woman that they talk about gardening and he waves, they're friendly. Nothing against her, just decides she's about the right size for him to be able to handle. He knows the layout of her house because it's just like his. And he makes a very, very elaborate plan of what he's going to do. And in this case, he is not going to leave her in the house. He has decked out a room in his church with black paper or black plastic on the windows to make sure nobody sees what he's doing. Because what he wants to do is take the body to the church and take pictures of her as he tries on undergarments he has stolen from other houses that he's broken into. So when he finds his way into her house, she's out. She comes in with a man. He's worried he's going to have to kill the guy, but the man leaves. And she comes to bed. He comes out. He's been sitting in a closet for almost 2 hours. He comes out of the closet, jumps on her, strangles her, and she dies very quickly because she is pretty fragile. He wraps her up in a blanket, takes her, puts her in the trunk of her car, which is this car. He then drives her to the church, does the stuff he wants to do, and then dumps her body into a ditch. So this one's left outside, and then he abandons the car and walks to where he had parked his own car. In this car, once it's found, because she's reported missing, are the blankets from her bed. So they know that somebody had her in the trunk of this car. And then eventually her body was found dumped near this culvert. So different, very different, nothing like any of the prior crimes. The victimology completely different, the MO different. It's very hard to know what to do with things like this. And also a very different location in Wichita. It's Park City, not even a suburb of Wichita. And then another year goes by. In September 1986, he uses the ruse of being a telephone repair guy. He goes and knocks on doors to other houses so that nobody mentions, this strange man that, he tells them all the same story. He's checking on telephone lines in the area because there's been some trouble. He has a emblem on a hat that makes him look real. And then he has planned on this one. He has heard her playing piano. He enters in the middle of the day, pretends that needs to look at her phone. There are dogs, and they're guard dogs, but they're outside. And she has a 2-year-old baby there sitting on the floor in the living room. She invites him in, so he doesn't force his way in. He doesn't break in and wait for her. In this case, he's come and acted like everything's normal. Takes her into the bedroom, binds her. She struggles, and he strangles her. Takes photos of her with it. He has a Polaroid camera. He takes her car. Her husband's on the way home for lunch. He sees the car leaving and thinks, that looks exactly like our car. And he's right, it is. He abandons it because this is one of the things he does, just like taking the glass of water and putting it back in a cupboard. But in this case, no communication. Also none with number 8. Well, he didn't want to communicate with number 8 because he didn't want to bring police into his neighborhood, but no communication with this one either. And the final one was in 1991, so a lot of time passing from between 1986 and 1991. So this is number 10 or 11 if you count attempted murder. And this is kind of an isolated house that was, I think, near a dog kennel. So this is PJ Dogside, PJ meaning projects, and he always names them something. In this case, again, elaborate, and he wants to take her to a barn so he can act out his most treasured fantasy, which is to hang somebody in a barn. And so that's what he has planned to do. He's going to put the body in her car, take the body away, come back, get some other things. It's very elaborate. I'm not even going to go through all of it. I will show you the map that he drew about it. So he has watched her, looked for ways to get into this house. It's difficult, cuts the phone line as he does on all the other ones, except for the one that he had not actually stalked, the one who had the kids in the house. He had not cut her phone line, but everybody else had. And then he can't get in. It's very cold. He finally picks up a brick and throws it through this patio door in the back of the house. And there it is. You can see what that looks like. And so he steps inside. She runs out. She thinks a car is hit, even though this is the back of her house. She thinks a car is coming through her door. He tells her to do what he said, and she won't be hurt, which is his typical thing. But this is the elaborate plan. This is his drawing, the elaborate plan of what he was attempting to do in this particular place. Let's see if I can get rid of some of this here. So he takes the body in her own car. He kills her in there, binds her with items he's found in the house, takes the body, dumps it out by some lakes, goes back, takes a jewelry box and some of the clothing, dumps that into a culvert, dumps the box on an abandoned farm property, goes back to get the body, but he can't. He wants to take her to a farm that he's already figured out that's up in the northwest part of Wichita near a different town. But he gets lost because it's a foggy night and a snowy night. It's January. A foggy, snowy night, he can't find his way. So he ends up just dumping the body underneath the bridge and then taking the car back and getting his own car. So and also he had an alibi where he was at a Boy Scout camp and had said he had to go get some stuff for a headache, etc. So this is the area from the BTK task force, their photos. So you can see under this bridge is where he dumped her. So he just couldn't find the barn that he wanted, so he didn't know what else to do with her. And she's still bound, but he comes back on the second night to take pictures of her. And he had you see the mask there, he had put the mask on her because by this time her face had lost a lot of its feminine qualities, as he put it. So he put the mask on her so he could take pictures to relive this. So you can kind of see here is a sense of most of them are in pretty much Wichita proper, but the number 8 and number 10 are much closer to where he actually lives. And then in 2004, so that was 1991. A lot of time has passed. In 2004, he hears that there is going to be a BTK retrospective on the unsolved murders, with the idea that there are only 7 because he communicated about only 7. And he doesn't like somebody else telling his story. So he decides to come back and play a little cat and mouse game again to show that BTK is still around. So you see this Bill Thomas Kilman BTK. These are some of the jokes. The Old Manor was again, sort of referring to one of the crime scenes, a place that he had actually broken into but not killed anybody. And then he also includes in this communication photos of the 9th victim that had not been linked to BTK, as well as her driver's license, which he had taken. So he had taken the photos of her when he was there, removed the driver's license from her purse. And so now he's proving I was there. This is something that he wants to do. So this begins a cat and mouse game that goes on for several months with the police, but it's also his undoing. He leaves items by things like the stop sign at First in Kansas, which is a reference to the Clutter murders, which he thought of as the first in Kansas. So he's doing a lot of little jokes here. These are codes for him, but they also have this aspect of, oh, this is all just a game. This is important behavior for us to try to understand. And he begins by giving them chapters of the various murders that he's done. And then he delivers things in a cereal box, serial referring to serial killer. And you can see some of the writing he's put on here. So B up above the T that he's circled, and then K. This is one of his field grams, like a telegram. He's calling it a box gram. So this is the kind of way he's communicating. And inside these boxes are little fashion dolls that he has dressed and bound with ropes and cords and whatnot, along with items he had taken from victims, some of his trophy items. So this is the little girl that he had hanged from a pipe in the basement. And he's dressed this doll to be her, as well as drawing on her, his own elaborations. Another one, and this is a woman who looked a bit like Nancy Fox, and here is the Nancy Fox doll with her driver's license attached to her. He also sends to the newspaper this game, which is very much like Zodiac, if you know anything about that case. Inside, he mentions that his name and address are in here. They're not really, not unless you really do a lot of kind of redrawing of things. But a number of things like telephone repair, serviceman, one of the pseudonyms he used, Anderson, is in here. So there, he just wants people to think about this and kind of play around with that. He sent this one to, actually, I think he sent it to the, not the newspaper, but to the TV station. Because I recently talked to the anchor who had received it. She was all freaked out about what some of the words were. And then he finally realizes he doesn't have as much time as he used to go copying everything, because what he would do is take these communications, copy them on a Xerox machine, take that copy and copy it again and again, 5 or 6 times. And he doesn't have that kind of time anymore because he's not a student at Wichita State University. So he knows how to use computers. He asked the task force, can I communicate with a floppy and not be traced? Be honest. I love that. And run this in the newspaper to Rex, tell Rex it'll be okay. And then I will send you a floppy disk with more instructions. They were sort of stunned that he could really be this stupid, but they ran the ad, it'll be okay. And he sent the disk. And they got him by looking at the metadata and items on that he thought he had erased. And his first name is on it. It's traceable to the Christ Lutheran Church, where he's the president of the congregation. Easy to figure out who used the church's computer, named Dennis. And so they basically have him see where he lives, see an SUV that they had on a surveillance video at a Home Depot where he had deposited one of the cereal boxes. And so now they know this is the guy. They arrest him, bring him in for interviews and interrogations. At first he dances around for about 3 hours saying, well, maybe I'm just a copycat because I read everything in the newspaper, etc. But they say they have DNA, and that surprises him. But he finally says, well, since you have DNA, it's 10 murders, not 7, because he wants to be sure he gets credit for them all. At the same time, they're looking through his office. He's a compliance officer. They're looking through his office and through his home for all these items, and they find, a mother lode, as he calls it, of all kinds of things, cutouts of women that he's decorated with gags and bindings, as well as pictures of people bound. And the middle picture is a picture he had drawn of his 10th victim, PJ Dogside, just before she died. And, other drawings. This is his fantasy barn, the one with the red arrow. That's what he had been trying to do with the 10th victim, but had lost his way. So that didn't work for him. They also found a lot of ropes and bindings in his shed, along with really weird pictures like these, and couldn't figure out who this was. So it wasn't any of the victims they knew of. So they asked him, what men did you kill? And he said that's me. That's me. I bound myself and took pictures. He had a Polaroid all rigged up with remote control. So he had lots of pictures of himself, which shows this was his motivation. It wasn't necessarily to kill. It wasn't the murders that aroused him. It was the binding of the victims. But once he had done all that, he had to eliminate them because they could identify him. So I believe at this point, we now will talk to Professor Plotkin about the case.
Great. Dr. Ramsland, if just so we don't share this screen, it's hard to have a conversation with this being the screen on, right? So that's so fascinating. And I definitely want to, I'm going to throw, hopefully we have a chat bar here. Do we have a chat, Dr. Telesco? I was hoping to, because I know Dr. Ramsland and I were going to ask some questions. Do we have a chat bar?
Yeah, we actually don't have a chat.
Oh, okay.
I learned my lesson from the last time that we wouldn't do that because this maybe attracts certain type of person
Okay.
to the webinar. But certainly if someone raises their hand, I can allow them to talk and they can ask a question.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll change things a little bit since we have quite a few participants. But with that, Dr. Ramsland's presentation is so amazing, and it comes from a forensic psychology aspect. Whereas we're going to switch gears a little bit. And this is why this presentation is just so compelling for not only myself and Dr. Ramsland, but for you all, because one of the things we do realize is that there's going to be many people that'll be involved in your investigation. So for a crime scene perspective, and I want you all to understand, when I go to a scene as a crime scene investigator and I handled I work with agencies and handle cases, they range from all kinds of theft cases and burglaries to all types of death cases. And in the city that I worked, we actually did have a serial killer that had been active during the time that I was there. The thing that's important to recognize with crime scene is my job is not about victimology. It is not about the psychology of the crime. It's that I'm there to look for the physical evidence that's going to help us in linking the crime scene. and maybe possibly linking them together. But more than anything, it's about linking people to the scene in order to help us to catch them. So with that in mind, and you all were looking at a lot of the different cases that we had present here, as crime scene, I may not know what I'm looking for. And skills that are so important for crime scene investigators are skills of observation, being very open-minded and being very flexible in our approach, being organized in our search. But I always like to say, let's have a method to our madness and let's be organized in that chaos that might be present. And then also recognizing that there will be people we will call in to assist us in our crime scene investigations, and more in the investigations. Dr. Ramsland, as amazing as she is, I would love to say she was staff on my department. She isn't. But if we needed her assistance, I have to be able to document the scenes and collect the evidence in such a way that we can call her in as an expert to assist us, which is a lot of times, and Dr. Ramsland has done this for many, many agencies, as well as the FBI and some other entities that will be called in later to help us. Bloodstain experts, shooting reconstruction, a lot of these experts that'll come in, pathologists, entomologists, anthropologists, there's so many, odontology. I mean, these are all great forensic disciplines, but we don't have them all on staff. So I have to be able to document the scene in such a way that I can call Dr. Ramsland and say, if I send you the case file, the evidence, the photographs, or we bring you to Miami, can you help us? Because we're starting to see a trend. Now, the first case she talked about, I've gone to cases like that. When we start to see that things are starting to look like there could be a connection, things that are going to start to throw a red flag up, okay? I used to call them red herrings, okay? That's an old school term for what's going to be like something that you're going to say, whoa, this is weird. This is different from the other cases that we might be seeing here. We look at the knots. We've talked about this. We're looking at physical evidence, and unfortunately we don't have a chat because I wanted to be able to ask you, and I think I appreciate Dr. Telesco saying that, hey, we can get you all to answer, but I think we won't have enough time, and so many of you are here, and I know you have great ideas and input. But if I went to this case in 1974, we would have a case that had 4 deceased. Now, I've handled cases that had multiple deceased people on the scene. But there's differences in this case that might be different from others. And one of them has to do with the fact that the victims were bound. Now, again, to me, and I know this will probably, I don't want it to sound terrible. You all, the victimology here is not what I have to concern myself with. And the reason why I say that is because I am going to a scene because a crime occurred. It doesn't, in my mind, I don't need to know why they were killed. I need to know who killed them, what did it, and how. So I like to say that crime scene is a what, where, how, and detectives are why. They're the ones that are going to ask, I try to get the answers to why was the Otero family targeted? I'm going to be the one that's going to look at the physical evidence and I'm going to say, okay, how are we going to link somebody to this crime scene? And I'm not thinking about any others. I'm on this one. We see that people like to commit crimes in their own method of operation. Okay, so we call that modus operandi. And in this case, and in the others, Dr. Ramsland was telling you about the psychology of how BTK or Dennis Rader was committing these crimes, and some of the things that he was doing. But some of the problems that the agencies were facing was, one, you have multiple agencies that may be involved. We have learned a long time ago, and from cases like this, that we have to start sharing information because killers will travel. A lot of times they'll kill close to home, which we heard that he killed within 4 blocks of his own home or 4 houses away. And then we know that they tend to span out as well. It's not like they want to get caught, but they like committing the crime and these crimes. So looking at the physical evidence, again, Why would I think he targeted this family? You all, that is not up to me as crime scene to think about. I've had students that had to step out of doing crime scene work because they kept saying to themselves, why would somebody do this to these people? Why would somebody do that? You all, we can't do that. If I sat here and I empathized or I felt bad for the victim, I cannot stay objective and do what I have to do. And I will move mountains to solve these cases. Now, Dr. Ramsden and I had a very good conversation yesterday about all of these cases, because this was, of course, in Kansas and I am in Miami. And we talked about the physical evidence that was there. Again, her job is, as a forensic psychologist, is to try to figure out why. Why are these people connected? And she's going to be called in while they're still occurring, because they're going to ask her assistance in trying to stop future crimes from occurring. I am going to continue to respond to these scenes as they continue to unfold. So we have to work as a team. Her input is going to be critically important to trying to help us prevent future crimes from occurring. And again, I'm documenting this scene so that in 1974, when the evidence was photographed, collected, and documented in such a way, we can call experts in at any time, whether it's right away or later on, to help us in solving the crime. Many crimes I worked were not solved immediately. And there were sweeping changes. And we'll talk a little bit about those changes that occurred that actually would make it that the way cases are solved now differed greatly from 1974 and even in the early 1990s. So some of the things too, as a crime scene, if I got to this scene, I don't want to know too much information. I know that sounds weird to you all, but if I hear too much about this case and everything that's there before I even begin my own observations and my own examination, I will try to make pieces fit. I will try to make the evidence fit with what I am hearing. It's an amazing phenomenon that occurs that when I go into a scene and I work it, and I will work them for a long time. All right, crime scene. I've worked on a crime scene for 19 straight hours with 2 people helping me. And then I went home and took a nap and went back and did it for another 19 hours. I have worked scenes for 30 hours or longer. We will work them until we've gotten the evidence that we need to. So I don't want to know a lot. All I want you to tell me is, where are the victims? Are there any living victims? Did we make any changes to this residence prior to my arrival? Did we break in a door to get in inside, which we've had to do? Did we turn on lights? Did we move bodies? Did we do anything at all? And yes, bodies will be moved so that fire rescue can determine if they are living or deceased. So those are the only things I want to know, because now I can let the scene speak for itself. And skills of observation are one of the best things you can have as a trait in crime scene and in forensic psychology. Dr. Ramsden's skills of observation are crazy good to the smallest details to the biggest. She mentioned the knots in the rope. That makes a huge difference. We can tell if they're linking together. She mentioned the granny knots and the clove hitch. I've had cases where knots were present when a victim was tied up, and I asked those pertinent questions. Can they tie those knots themselves? Does the husband know how to tie those knots? Are they campers? These are actually very important questions to ask. So again, I'm looking at physical evidence. The rope, she mentioned the rope to you. There's a lot of evidence here. I don't know if you all know this, and let's just see a raise of hands. How many of you think that there was some type of physical evidence on every single case that Dr. Ramsden presented? Just by, let's see how many, just a show of, raise your hand. Hopefully we can see how many of you are there. Raise a hand. How many of you think that every single one of these cases had some form of physical evidence? I didn't say solvable. I'm just saying physical. So I'm seeing 47 so far, 52. All right. Yes, they did. And I'll tell you right out of the gate, a victim is considered physical evidence. Physical evidence is also considered a lot that we can get from there. There were so many things in each one of them that became important to the case. And of course, again, linking them together, they didn't know what they had until they started to see a trend. And Dennis Rader, BTK, and other serial killers have changed up their MO, their modus operandi. They don't tend to like to, and Dr. Ramsden will jump more back in about that. But again, I don't care. I don't care how different things might be. My job is to look at them and to see what the evidence is. And all of a sudden, after handling 1 or 2 or 3 cases or more, and you all, it isn't just homicides or serial killers. Burglars tend to commit crimes the same way. Y'all remember the Home Alone movie, the water bandits? Remember, after every burglary they did, they turned on all the faucets? That's their MO. How people ransack, how they enter, how they leave, how did they get in? What do they do when they're there? These were all things that Dr. Ramsden and I spoke about. I will tell you this, the longer people spend in a crime scene, the more chance we have of getting them. We have more chance of getting them the longer they were there. And the interesting thing was that Dennis Rader revisited some of these scenes to go back and get some artifacts from the scene. So he could take their jewelry box, he could take their car. So there was quite a bit of evidence that may have been linked between these scenes. And we looked at them, and I know Dr. Ramsden is also scrolling through, which is fantastic. If you could go on to the, Dr. Ramsden, go to his, the rendering, his drawing. Okay. Yeah, it's right there. Eyewitness testimony does not tend to be as reliable. People's perspectives could be different. This is not considered physical evidence. It is testimonial evidence. And we face 2 different types of evidence that we might be looking for on when we have an investigation. Testimonial is witness statements, what people saw, observed, and people's perspectives could be different. So again, this is not something I would do. This is something that our detectives would do. Do we find that these are important? Yes, absolutely. And we need to do them quickly when we have it that it is fresh in somebody's mind. We don't like to show pictures ahead of time. We don't want them to be influenced by the news. And we actually don't want them to be influenced by other renderings. So we tend to not want to influence people with a rendering with other influences. Dr. Ramsden, did you want to jump into that?
Well, I wanted to ask what we're supposed to do with somebody has their hand up often. Rebecca has been raising her hand over and over, and I don't know what should we stop?
Okay, let's let her ask the question.
Or
Well, that's fine, or either that, or we can just wait until, we end it at 8:30. And so we can, depending on you both, we could stop the presentation at like 8:10 and allow 20 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay.
It's up to
All
you.
right, Rebecca,
It's up to you both. You both are in charge.
Yeah,
So-
I kind of think whoever's raising their hand right now has been doing it persistently.
Okay.
And maybe she needs something clarified.
Okay, go ahead.
Rebecca.
Rebecca, I gave you permission to speak.
Rebecca, you there?
Rebecca, you've been given audio privileges here, microphone privileges.
Yeah, it looks like her mic is still off. So she needs to turn it on if she wants to ask a question.
Exactly.
So Rebecca, if you don't ask your question, we're going to move on. I'm not sure why you keep raising your hand, but
Oh,
there you go.
I just had a quick question. I'm a doctoral student.
Rebecca, you there?
Oh, yes. Me?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So she needs to turn it on.
Yes, Rebecca, can you hear us? We're saying.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
You're fine.
So my quick question. I just had a quick question. I'm a doctoral student at Walden University, and I'm doing my dissertation on hunting patterns. of serial sexual predators who murder their victims. And my question is, do you guys know why there was such a long cooling off period with the BTK and why he didn't kill more frequently?
Well, I do know because I still talk to him. I've known him for 10 years. And it was not a cooling off period as many true crime writers have tried to depict. He was stalking, he was breaking into homes. He had 55 projects on the list he sent to me. It was more that it just didn't work out. Also, he had 2 kids and he got busy. In his early years, he was a student at Wichita State University. And he could always say he was in the library studying or writing a paper. It wasn't so easy to do once he graduated. And he had a hard time finding ways to be able to do this, but it wasn't a cooling off period. What he says is more like a fisherman goes out and just doesn't catch something that day. He said he certainly had targets. There were near misses. He dug graves in the anticipation of killing more people, but it didn't happen. So I know that a lot of the books written about him before he actually did the one with me think that it was a cooling off period, but they're not correct about that.
All right, so what I'll do is I'll jump in and then Dr. Ramsland's going to jump right back in as well. And then we'll definitely have time for a Q&A afterwards. So Rebecca, thanks. That was a great question. And that's definitely why we're here tonight. What I wanted to mention was, let's start talking about how crime scene would start to link the crimes together. So some of the things that you all have seen in this presentation, and I do know about the cases as well from Dr. Ramsland and from others, is that he did bind and tie up and use ligatures for his victims. He did like to strangle them, and he would choose different bindings. He would use nylons, he would use scarves, he would use rope, he would use duct tape. He did shoot one of the victims, so there would have been projectiles, but that was very different for him, and that was the only case he had done that with. And that was the Wright case, correct? That was the brother that actually survived his injuries there. And he did use knives as well, as Dr. Ramsland had said. And then, later on, and he didn't do it with all the cases, but when he sent the cereal boxes, these are actually all forms of very good physical evidence that we in crime scene could have yielded some forensic analysis with. Y'all are looking at a box here, but the fact that he used ink, okay, and he stamped it, he circled the T for the BTK. He has the boxgram, as Dr. Ramsland mentioned to you, instead of saying it was a telegram, he called it a boxgram. But these are things that we would be looking for as far as where he purchased them. I have actually made cases on receipts and I actually made a case off of a cereal box that the offenders had opened in the victim's home prior to committing the crime there. The items that were inside the box become important as well. So, where Dr. Ramsland, and Dr. Ramsland, go to the next slide, where for her, she would be examining the psychology of this, about the binding and the tying of the knots, and the way he actually added artifacts, or he colored the crotch area of this doll, and then on another one he put eyebrows on the other doll as well. So he was adding to them. These are things like inks we would be looking at. The more he is handling these dolls, the better it is for us. Going and trying to find out if an adult male is buying dolls. These are things that our detective would be looking to do, as well as the way they're bound. All these things, all those items, the more items that are inside that box, the better chance we might have of linking somebody to them. Now, the biggest problem we run into, and the boxes are a very good indication of this, that box was put on the shelf by a clerk at the grocery store, and their fingerprints and DNA easily could be on there. So common areas or common objects are absolutely susceptible to fingerprints and outside sources of forensic analysis to be there. So I could have, Grace Telesco's fingerprints on that box, to which if Dr. Telesco, which she has not been, in order for us to link fingerprints, you have to have been arrested in this country. So part of the problem in this was if there was no DNA in the database, if there were no fingerprints in the database belonging to somebody, then we can't link you to them. We can't link you to the actual crime or the evidence. However, in the future, if something should happen and somebody's arrested for stealing a pack of gum, all of a sudden, all of the cases start to come forward. And now we start to see that all this is coming out. So the longer somebody is planning this, the longer they're doing or handling the evidence, the more chance we have of actually catching them. So to me, when we look at, and if you scroll down a couple slides, Dr. Ramsland, the doll with the jewelry. So in there, we've got the pipe, but this one here, the ropes that he actually used, how long he was handling them. Also, when the search warrant was actually issued for Dennis Rader's home, we will look to match up ropes, duct tapes, twine, anything at all that we may have found. And they did indeed, they found the types of ropes on the scene, the twines, the different types of things. Actually, in the first scene, he brought his own in. We like when they do that, because now it helps us to try to make the connection with their own home. Not only that, we can actually try to match up ends of when ropes are cut, when duct tape is cut. Xerox machines, Dr. Ramsland mentioned that he would Xerox the notes, but he would do it 4 or 5 times because he actually was aware that we probably could link them to Xeroxing. He used a typewriter. Can we find the typewriter that actually matched the notes? These are all physical evidence ways that we forensically attach people to the evidence and to each other, to the scene and to the evidence itself. The note, just looking at the note, fingerprints, DNA, and inks we told you about, and typewriting. So we actually have question document examiners that would step in and help us with this. Now, the remarkable thing, and Dr. Ramsland and I talked about this, in 1974, I'm actually amazed we solved cases, to be honest with you, because a lot of times, years and years ago, it really came down to eyewitness testimony. A lot of times, with a lot of these cases, the fingerprints have been around for a very long time, but the science of forensics has really exploded. And even when I started in crime scene in 1995, I was handling a large amount of cases, but it wasn't until 1998, 3 years later, and from 1998 to 2000, that DNA made the most leaping changes and advances ever that we have seen still to date. And even now, we're just still exploding. In 1995, we needed a full vial of blood in order to be able to link people to evidence. And I needed a large amount of blood on the scene to be able to link. Now, all I have to do is swab a doorknob that doesn't even have blood on it, and our DNA analysts can get full profiles. A bite mark that could be done. Years ago, you couldn't get a lot, but now you swab a bite mark and you can get enough DNA from it. So in 1995, we were handling our cases. And then in 1998 is when we started saying a cheek swab, we call them buccal swabs, was now all the DNA source we needed from our offender in order to link them to the evidence. So we saw some really good changes at that time. But again, looking at the scene, and I want you all to think about it, when we go to the scene, what is it at the scene we can get? Now, Dr. Ramsland mentioned the glass, and that's fascinating. One of the things that's so important in crime scene is you never know what will be significant. You'll never know. So everything could be significant. That cinder block that was used to break in the glass was very important because it actually could have his DNA. Now, he was known to wear gloves. Sometimes he wore latex gloves. And then Dr. Ramsland mentioned he also would wear leather gloves, and he would always throw them out. She said he never kept them. So he knew this. But you know what? As much of the planning as they do, I have actually made cases because they're thinking about committing the crime, but they forget that they bring stuff in with them, that at the time they purchased it, they may not have been wearing gloves at the time. Or, I mean, I'm looking for that slip up. If it's a ski cap they leave behind, shoe wear, I trace evidence. How much contact has he made? He would strangle the victims, which meant he had contact with them. How long did he stay on the scene? I asked Dr. Ramsland. Could be anywhere from 20 minutes to over 2 hours with the first family of 4, the Oteros. He spent about 2 hours on that scene. He also liked to do the glass drinking thing. Now, this is the cool thing. If you've got those skills of observation, and I have found the craziest evidence where you never would have expected it. But what should stand out in the mind of a crime scene investigator, because we do this, we will photograph every single cabinet opening and every drawer and the contents of your garbage cans. We will check all of the cabinets to see if things are moved or missing. I have made cases because I found a single can that had condensation on it when the rest did not, which indicated that somebody used the can, opened it up, drank from it, and left it. So it meant it started in a cold climate and it was now in a warm. So again, I would have been the type to open up the kitchen cabinets and all of a sudden there's a glass in the cabinet that's wet. It's totally bizarre, but that's what skills of observation do. Sometimes it's the smallest of things that could make the whole case. And as Dr. Ramsland mentioned, he drank from this glass and put it back in there. And that was his way of mocking the police, like, you'll never catch that I did this. But yet he left his DNA on that glass every single time he did it. Whether or not he had his fingerprints or not, he was known to wear gloves. But there's so many, the cars, he took the cars in a lot of them. And then he would drive in their car some of the time. And then he would go back and get his own car. So I had asked, and I'm like, wow, now this is bizarre to me. He would drive them in their own car and leave the car, which meant he had to get back to his own car. So to me, I'm thinking footwear, shoe wear impressions. I'm thinking this man is in motion. He's moving. So, and again, he's got to be close enough to his next, what's he going to walk a mile? And how much stuff is he going to be?
Yeah, actually he did.
And he, well, did he walk a mile in all of them? No, you said he, in
No,
some,
in some of them, but he always dumped the keys or hid the keys in ways that people couldn't just get in the car and drive it away. Always.
Right. Okay. So, but now did they find the keys in any of the cases? Did they find?
They did. They found the keys in the last one because he threw them on the roof of her house.
Now, interestingly so, that should be better police investigations. Now, mind you, there's a lot of distance to cover. And when you think about the keys, he's going to get rid of them. But again, there was no forced entry in the cars, which meant that he had access to the keys. So in my mind, the questions I'm going to ask on the scene is, where did she leave the keys? Because now I know he's looking for them and I know he's got them at some point because he drove them. Now, also the cars become important because now he's been in them. So I'm going to go for vacuum tracing. I'm going to go for hair and fibers. I'm going to go DNA. I'm going to hope I get soil transfers. In the last picture, and Dr. Ramsland, the glass, and this was great. I'm going to have Dr. Ramsland tell you about the glass, the point of entry that he broke. The shoes, mention the shoes, Dr. Ramsland.
Yeah, when he broke in, he had broken off a part of his weapon that fell into the glass. And he wasn't really aware of that until later when he went back, but he was definitely aware of the fact that he had to wipe off the bottom of his shoes because it would have glass fragments. And in this case, he kept his shoes, but he really cleaned them off to make sure there was no glass fragments in the bottom.
And we love when they think they clean off everything. It's crazy because I've actually had it that I've gotten glass on subjects and I've gotten blood on the bottom of their shoes, even though they clean them. Now, this is the hard thing about glass evidence, is that it's considered a class characteristic, meaning that the glass from that sliding glass door could have been on thousands of sliding glass doors. This alone would not have been enough evidence to convict Dennis Rader. Heck, we wouldn't have even gotten an indictment. All we would do is try to link him to the scene with small glass fragments. And again, breaking glass. This was something he did not do. It totally would have been, it implies it's more of an impulsive thing because breaking glass is loud. People cut themselves, which could make it so that they're bleeding on the scene. We do know that there was some blood on some of these scenes, which would have been there, but it isn't the blood that you're seeing because it's a lot of times it's probably your victim. It's everywhere they were in contact that you try to see that you're going to get their transfer DNA. We call it transfer. So if he's sweating and you said he sweat, that's why he liked to drink water. If I saw that glass in the cabinet, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this guy's thirsty for a reason. And people do tend to get nervous. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm hoping he is sweating, he's secreting somewhere, and in wiping his forehead, maybe he's touched something. So it's really up to us to get the swabs that we need to from all the locations and to get anywhere he has been or the subjects have been. Y'all, the victims are living in their own home. I don't need to get a victim in their own home. They're all there. Unfortunately, they're all deceased. My job is to get the offender in the scene. And we collect a large amount of evidence. People are like, why couldn't they solve it more? Why couldn't they send everything to the lab? You all, the lab cannot work everything. They cannot work all the evidence. They don't have time. There's a lot of other cases out there. And I always say, the evidence you collect is a question you want the lab to confirm. I don't need them to tell me how to do my job. But I know if I'm sending a swab from that cinder block, there was a reason why I sent it. Because I know it was used to break that window. It is inside the home. So that's important. But if that cinder block was sitting outside, I'm going to leave it there. Because maybe it's not as relevant, but the truth is evidence that is on the outside of the residence becomes much more problematic in linking somebody to the scene because anybody's DNA or fingerprints could be there. So when we watch these shows that everybody's watching, we need to understand there's a reality to crime scene work. But I look at these cases and I'm like, you know what? I'm not saying I could have solved them, but I know how hard I would have been working in each one, not knowing if they were linked or related, but knowing that I've got somebody that spent some time in there because the victims were found bound if they were found in their home. There could be signs of a struggle, and there were scenes that showed struggle, which means there was fighting going on. And in that case, our bodies become important too, because you hope that there's contact with. I know there's contact with these victims because he bound them. But did they get their hands on them? Did they cause any injuries to them? So that's I wanted you to kind of get a feel for the crime scene aspect of this. Dr. Ramsland and I together, I think, could probably solve everything. I'd like to say we could solve everything. We could try. I know that she and I would give it everything we've got. Can I live with knowing that I couldn't solve every case? Yes. But can I live with the fact that I didn't give it 110% every time I went out to any type of scene? No. Which is why every time I went out to a crime scene, it got 100% of me. And it's really important to go in there, let the scene speak for itself, look and see what's out of place. That's why the cup in the cupboard would have looked out of place to me, because it would have, and I'm not saying, I don't know how much time would have passed. Did he put it back exactly the way he found it? He probably didn't, solely because he wanted to see if the police could catch it. Could I miss things? Of course, I'm a human. I'd like to say I've missed something, but I don't know that I've missed anything. So I guess that's a good sign. So that's my take on the crime scene aspect of all of these cases. I hope you understand where Dr. Ramsland and I would come together to help in solving this case, and how each person's approach is as important as the other one. But the one thing is, I don't want to ever do anything in the case that prevents Dr. Ramsland from doing what she has to do, and from an anthropologist or an entomologist. Any bodies dumped out in the woods or whatever would have had entomologists involved. Calling in writing experts. I don't want to do anything that's gonna question any of the, or make it difficult for the question documents that are in place. So that is my portion of this. Dr. Ramsey, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I see that somebody is persistently asking a question as well. Should we let that person ask it?
Dr. Telesco, what do you think?
I think so. We have two questions. One question is coming from the YouTube chat, and that is from Freddie Ponce. And he's asking, why did he explain, or did he explain why there was a break in time in the murders, and why did he stop?
Okay, he didn't stop. He stopped when he was arrested. He had targeted another victim in 2004 when he began his cat and mouse game. It was very elaborate, much more elaborate than anything he'd ever done before. But when he got and he studied the victim, studied her habits, knew what he's going to do, when he figured out how to get a cover story, he went to the house and there was a work crew outside, so he couldn't put his plan into place at that time. He then decided on another time, but he was arrested before he could get that to happen. So he never did actually stop. And as I mentioned before, he also said he did get busy. He didn't have ways to cover for himself like he did when he was studying at Wichita State University. He had 2 kids at this point. He had a full-time job, active in his church. So he didn't have as much free time, but he was always stalking victims, always putting them down as projects. When he went out of town, he would break into people's houses. He had 55 projects that he had in mind. So he did not stop. He just didn't succeed. And that's exactly how he puts it.
And I did want to mention also that it was DNA that did link Dennis Rader to some of these crimes. So it was great to get that he confessed, but he was leaving DNA on some.
And he wouldn't have confessed without the DNA.
Right. So please understand that, and that's important, especially nowadays. With how evidence is and how sensitive DNA can be, that we were able to link Dennis Rader through DNA to these cases. So understand that we were able to get some physical evidence in these cases to link him to them. Dr. Telesco, do you want to control the questions for us?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm wondering if we still need the PowerPoint.
I don't know. It depends on what questions they ask.
Okay. So I want people to be able to really see you both.
Oh, I don't care about that.
Okay. I know that some of your fans do. There's a question here. Do you think that he would have kept killing and changed his MO if he didn't get caught?
I know that he would have kept killing. He said he already had targeted the next victim and he had plans for more. He talked about killing out of state just to throw people, but he constantly changed his MO. So there certainly would have been more changes. But nevertheless, the MO is one thing. That's just the way they approach what they're going to do. The ritual, it grows out of the sexual needs and urges and fantasies. So the binding was always going to be part of it. But certainly he'd change his MO because he did it all the time.
Okay, great. I have another question here. What are some things we can think about from a sociological perspective of the killer? Was he unhappy? Did he simply have a kink?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how that's sociology exactly.
More psychology? More psychology?
Yeah, that's not sociology, it's psychology. And yes, he had a kink. He had sexual fantasies that were very much what compelled him and why he would do this to people. And once he targeted them as his projects, as he called them, they were dead. They were pawns in his game, and it was really for his own satisfaction.
And Dr. Ramsland, you mentioned that his past history was not a particularly violent one, right? His own upbringing.
Yeah, there was nothing in his past. He was not abused. His parents were both in the home. He had 2 sets of grandparents. He grew up an all-American boy, spent a lot of time on farms. He went into the military, but didn't see any violence whatsoever. So no, it was really all about dominating women. He did think a lot about girl traps because girls made him feel off balance. This is his way of keeping them under control. He was not, I mean, this is a very important distinction. Some serial killers, for them, it's the murder that is so hot for them, that arouses them. That is not the case with Dennis Rader. It's the binding and seeing the terror and the sense of domination. And once he's done that, he has to kill them because now they're witnesses. So there's a real difference between going after victims because murder is what you want to do, and going after victims because you want to use them in your fantasy life, and now they have to be discarded. So there's two very different approaches there.
Thank you. So we have Nicholas DiPietro. Nicholas, I've just given you permission to ask the question. You've got mic privileges.
Hey, so my question is, how did he, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how did he manage to like hide it from his family for so long? Because it was like, that was a lot of stuff he had in like his house before he was found. But like, how did he manage to hide it? Because I know you said he had 2 kids, and I feel like that's sort of something someone would find out at some point.
Nope, he had hidey holes. That's what he calls them, hidey holes. False bottoms in closets, secret compartments in a tree house and in his shed and under the house in places where his wife would never look. And he also buried some things in farmers' fields and abandoned farm machinery. But how did he hide the secret life is a much more interesting question. And he calls his process cubing. Some of us call it compartmentalizing, but his idea of a cube is even better, because the idea of a cube is you have multiple faces that you can switch around for any given situation, so that you see any given face, whether it's family man, serial killer, thief, church president, whatever. And all of those are part of him, but he just uses the face that he needs in any given instance. It's a very superficial way to live, but we certainly know that psychopaths have incredibly superficial emotionality. So they have no allegiance to the truth. They have allegiance only to what they want. And so that's how he did it. But the physical hiding of stuff was pretty easy for him. It was just building secret compartments and hiding in places where he knew his family wasn't going to look. And his house was small, believe me. It was like 900 square feet for 4 people. And yet he did manage to hide. And he hid a lot in the files in his office, which were locked files.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Scott Windle is watching us on YouTube, and his question is, did he ever explain that he had personal history that would have explained the binding fascination?
He had a personal history of binding himself, and he found it highly pleasurable. And at the same time, he was reading true detective magazines where women were bound on the covers, and he would see the look of terror on their faces. He studied a couple of serial killers who bound their victims, and it just merged, it paired with his sexual development and merged into the kind of fantasy that aroused him the most. But it started with him binding himself. And it also really started where he was bound playing cowboys and Indians, and he found it to be both titillating and terrifying at the same time. So that's when he was a little kid, and that became part of something he wanted to repeat.
Samantha, I'm going to give you mic privileges now.
Perfect. Thank you. I just have a quick question about his behavior and the investigation process. So, I mean, there was a big change from the first crime scene to the second, where we're moving from a family to what was supposed to be a single person, a change of weapons. Was this really hard to investigate due to the different changes in MO? Like he would all of a sudden hide a body or he'd move it to a different location and other times he'd leave it. So did that create any challenges for them?
Well, they didn't link the scenes. I'm going to let Sharon take this, but let me just say he did not target a family. He targeted Julie Otero and her daughter. And to his great surprise, Joseph Otero was home that day. He figured he could easily murder the little boy and then just have the two women, the little girl and the woman to himself. So the targeting of the family was not really what he was doing. But I'm going to let Sharon talk, Professor Plotkin, talk about the challenges for these kinds of crime scenes.
So what becomes problematic with this kind of situation is one, the location for one, because agencies have to talk together to think if they've actually got the same suspect committing both crimes. The fact that you have a family that died in the first one and then you had not as many victims in the second one, the fact that knots had changed, I think as an agency, we're going to go in and we're going to investigate it and we're going to handle the case and we're going to look at the evidence. And it really is, we have NCIC, National Crime Information Center, that actually helps for agencies to input information there. It talks about MOs. It talks about, was a gun used? Was a gun stolen? Cars that were taken, things like that. So multiple agencies can go into the system to try to see if their crime looks similar to somebody else. But your biggest problem is that agencies don't tend to share information like they should. And again, because his MO was changing, did not make them think they had the same person committing the crime. So again, what the best thing of all that happens is we send our evidence to the lab and labs connect cases because they'll submit them into national databases for fingerprints and for DNA. And that's when we start to see that cases are being linked together. Again, in the 70s, this was most likely not occurring, which is why we tended to see that so many cases went unsolved or not even linking together. Or we might have gotten Dennis Rader on our case, but didn't even link him to others. And indeed, he was the one that admitted to additional cases that law enforcement did not even have him connected to. So again, I'm going to handle my case the way we would handle it, get it to the lab, and hope the lab is going to disseminate the information when other cases are coming through, and hope that we've got our national databases, which we recognized had to happen because offenders were moving across state lines. So we can't say that they're going to commit every crime in Miami. They're going to do them in Wichita. They're going to do them in areas of Kansas. But like Ted Bundy, we know was in California, Colorado, and even in Florida. So hopefully I answered that.
Thank you. We have a lot of hands up. I'd like to try to see if we can get at least, the majority of them answered. I have Gregory Tony, who I don't know, that name might be familiar to some folks. He's a PhD student candidate at Nova Southeastern University. He's the Broward sheriff, and he's also an adjunct with us as well. And so he actually had his hand up way before I took some of the other questions. So you've got mic privileges now, Sheriff.
Hey, awesome. Thank you so much, Doc, for giving me a chance to kind of just jump in here really quickly. I am Sheriff Tony of Broward County. I'm responsible for roughly 5,800 employees under my command, and we're a population of roughly 2 million people here. And initially, I was going to pop on and listen to as much as I could before departing out of the office, but it was impossible to walk away from this presentation. And I just really wanted to pay a compliment and say, thank you both for all the great work that you do, because it's not often highlighted in the public. We as the badge carriers get all the credit for the work that gets done, but people don't see all the extra support networks that make these cases possible. And I'm also going to extend something out here. Anytime you're in Broward County, you're a welcome guest here to present to any of my staff, because I think what you've offered is invaluable for what we need in this community. So bravo and keep it going.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Sheriff.
much, Sheriff. Very good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Jasmine, you've got the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. My question is for Professor Plotkin. As far as like for crime scene, do you think it's beneficial or maybe necessary to kind of like go to a police academy, start off as a patrol officer and kind of work your way into those units? Or can you just kind of like go to school and go straight into like crime scenes?
Well, I'm glad Sheriff Tony was here because at his department, you must be sworn to do crime scene. At sheriff's departments, Broward Sheriff's Office, and others, you are required to be a sworn police officer in order to do crime scene. I was not sworn. I was a civilian with a master's degree, and most police agencies are going with civilians to do crime scene work. And I will tell you a couple benefits for that. One is I was trained to do crime scene and be a crime scene investigator, where I spent 21 years doing it. I had amazing trainings, just like his crime scene people would. His detectives or sworn officers still receive the training as well. But the one benefit to being a civilian crime scene technician is that I'm never going to leave crime scene. I'm going to stick it out for the long haul, even though I do know that he had Stu Mosher and Tom Hill and some others there for decades, the best of the best, who I've learned with, trained with, and worked with. But most agencies, Jasmine, do not require you to be law enforcement. What I will tell you is this: get yourself into some programs, crime scene technology programs, get yourself into some strong trainings, because you need to be really, really effective and have the right tools and techniques to do crime scene work. You are not required to be an officer at most departments. And again, wherever you plan to go, look up the requirements there, but you're going to want to have a strong crime scene technology or forensics degree in order to do crime scene. So I had no interest in being an officer. That was not what I wanted. I love crime scene, and that is all I wanted to do. So I did not go to the police academy. I went right into crime scene work. So
Great.
hopefully I answered that for you, Jasmine. And
Thank you.
Dr. Telesco can always
Yes.
put our email out there. I'm available for any additional emails if you don't mind. Okay, thank you.
We definitely can do that. Unfortunately, we don't have a chat, so you
Well,
can
how about if
maybe-
I'll just say it. So my email is S like Sharon, Plotkin, Plotkin @MDC, Miami-Dade College.edu. splotkin@mdc.edu. Please reach out to me. I have been in the industry a long time, and I'm very blessed to say that I know a lot of people, and I can help you get in the direction and place you want to go. So please reach out.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Ramsland, if you're willing, just say the word as far as
Yes.
sharing your email.
Yeah, it's just Catherine.ramsland@desales.edu.
Great, thank you. I'm not gonna, if somebody already went and asked a question, I'm not gonna have them repeat another question, but I have somebody by the name of Hannah Snyder, and she's asking this question about the significance of the lights being turned off or on by first responders before the scene is processed.
I made a case off of a light switch. And that's why we don't like too many things to be altered or changed. I've had officers turn on air conditioning. That makes a big difference as far as temperature changes in a room. It will affect if we're trying to determine how long a deceased body may have been on the scene. Turning on lights on and off. We don't make any changes or alterations. When I get there, we don't want to. I understand why officers will. First responders, I will always say, the number one thing for them is safety. I want them to go home to their families at night. If the room is dark, if the scene is dark, they need to turn on lights. They need to go and try to seek out victims to render medical attention. And then they need to seek out and see if subjects are there or suspects are still on the scene. But other than that, we want as little or contact with on our end, because we don't want to be contaminating. But do not think that we cannot make the case off of a light switch. And that's why I prefer that nothing has been altered or changed.
Great, thank you. Rebecca Myers, I know you've been waiting a long time. You've got your mic privileges now. Rebecca? Savannah?
Hi, good evening, ladies. I have a question. In with the BK killer, did he ever try out any of his fantasy with his spouse?
Initially, he wanted to see if she'd be into some experimentation. She said no, so that was the end of that.
Okay.
That was simple, sweet, to the point.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so I'm promoting Marie Ann Raguso to panelist. And I'm going to ask her to share her screen, her video with us. She's very, very special. I mean, all of our students are very, very special, but she's the one that I mentioned earlier. She has a question for you, Dr. Ramsland. I think that you are her idol, right? Isn't that true?
I do look up to you.
Thank you.
So go ahead, Marie. This is your chance. Go for it.
Yes, so Dr. Ramsland and perhaps Professor Plotkin can answer this as well. I wrote my question down. What special requests must be made before and to who in order to be allowed to conduct an interview with a serial offender?
Depends on what state. You see, the first thing you have to do is find out where they are, get their prisoner number, because any communications are going to go through that. You have to contact them if they want to put you on their, and I'm just speaking about my experience because it's not the same from one state to another. If you contact them to see if they would put you on their list, sometimes they have a limit to who is on their list. So you contact them, they might ask you to put money on their account. That's up to you. You might not hear back from them if you don't, but again, it's up to you. You should absolutely have a PO box. Do not use your home address by any means or your university location, but have a PO box. So stay as distant from them as possible. And I mean, I still do. I've known Raider for 11 years and I still use PO box. So yeah, so you find out, go on, prison whatever.com where they have the numbers, or you go to like if you were going in Kansas, you would go to the Kansas Department of Corrections. They would have a search there for where the offender is housed. You get the number, you get the address, then you can write to them and find out if they will, in fact, correspond with you or speak to you by phone. And there will be a protocol that they will tell you have to follow.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad I made this introduction. And so I think that you're going to be receiving an email very soon from Marie Ann.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And finally, because we are out of time and I would like you to have the opportunity to sort of wrap up, summarize any other highlighted points that you'd like to make. But I would like to ask Brendan to come on. Brendan's my sidekick. He is an undergraduate criminal justice major. And Brandon, can you please share your video? I know you have a question, so go for it.
Hey, Dr. T, can you just give me video sharing privileges real quick? Sorry about that.
You got it.
Thank you. Hi, how you doing? Thank you both for being here tonight. It was an incredible show. I really appreciate it. I just have a quick question for Professor Plotkin. I thought it was really interesting how you kind of went over confirmation bias and how you don't like to get any info about the potential theories on the scene before you go in. That kind of just had me thinking, how much of an impact do you think that makes on people who are entering crime scenes?
So, we also call it cognitive bias. And this is something we actually see spilling across a lot of disciplines. I don't know how other people conduct their work in crime scene, but I know that I was, and I feel like I am very successful in crime scene work. Again, did I solve every case? No. If the evidence isn't there, it isn't there. But did I do everything I had to find it? Was I willing to be patient and open-minded and flexible and thinking outside the box? I just don't like to be, I did not want to be influenced in any way. I know that I can influence a lot of you. If I told my students, hey, by the way, come to class tomorrow, and it's going to be really cold in class and bring a jacket, even though they were never there, they'll at least half will probably bring a jacket. So I don't want to I don't want to influence anybody in crime scene, and I did not want to be influenced. So in my mind, if I went into a scene with an open mind and good skills of observation and did what I had to do, and Dr. Ramsland did the interviewing of the suspect, and what she gathered from the interview matches and aligns with what I have found on the scene, independent of one another, we most likely have found the truth. And that's what makes it so wonderful, is that she and I came together independent without influencing one another. Once I've done a lot of the investigation, I'm on the scene, I will call the detective routinely and say, okay, I'm finding this. Are you hearing anything that's telling us that this is important in some way? Because I'm finding it, I see it, it exists, I feel it is important, I don't know why. That's the big thing, you all. We may not know what anything means on a crime scene. Why it becomes significant is something that will come out later. But again, if independently of myself and the detective, we have what we're finding is aligning, then we most likely have the truth. So I hope I answered that, Brendan, for you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great.
I find it really fascinating how important it is to kind of do both of your independent research before you can come in together to make the end goal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brendan. I have a final question that, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Dr. Ramsland, and that is, and I think that actually one of our viewers asked the question too, and you may have alluded to this, but diagnosis. Is there a diagnosis for this serial killer, the BTK killer?
Well, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so the only diagnoses that were done on him was for competency to stand trial. And at the time, I think when they did the competency report, I think they thought they were going to end up going to trial, but he pleaded guilty to everything, so there wasn't a trial. But they found him to have OCD and hypergraphia, which was the first thing I thought, because he writes a lot all over the page, keeps meticulous notes about his daily life, and also kept murder journals and whatnot. So hypergraphia can be a symptom of temporal lobe epilepsy. He did have blackouts as a child, so that's possible. But I myself can't give him a diagnosis because I have never tested him, and I've done, some over-the-counter types of tests and whatnot, but
Right.
because I'm not a licensed clinical psychologist, I don't have the ability to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you both for such an unbelievable dynamic presentation. And we definitely got a lot of viewers, both on the webinar as well as on YouTube. And I think we definitely want to talk to you again in the future. Is there any closing remarks that you'd both like to make?
Dr. Ramsey, start?
I guess I would just say, he asked about cognitive bias. There are a lot of them, and they have infected multiple crimes and crime scene analyses. You can find many, many books about that, and I would definitely recommend it, because I think we always have to keep in mind how easily we submit to bias. And I find many, especially some of the amateur sleuths today, you think logic is the same thing as truth, because logic feels good. when you think you've made a logical case, you've arrived at the truth, and that's anything but. So we definitely have that bias, and a lot of those mistakes were made in the Rader case. He could have been caught earlier, but there was bias. One officer who did see him in a restroom, and he was changing his clothes because he was a volunteer for the Boy Scouts. The officer thought, well, that can't be who we're looking for. So bias can really trip you up, and I think it's an extremely good thing for people to study through cognitive psychology. There are multiple different types, and only awareness will help you to get past that and do really good investigations. It really can affect even your ability to observe, because tunnel vision is about deciding what you're looking for, and then you don't see the other stuff. So anyway, a lot of that came into the Rader case, and I think he would have been caught earlier, even in the 70s, had we not had those kinds of issues.
Right. Thank
And
you.
that is a fabulous point, that yes, we bring in our own bias. What are we willing to do to solve a case? Again, I can live with not solving a case. I can't live with that I didn't do what I was supposed to do on that case. I tell my students all the time, if you don't feel you can give 100% of yourself to your crime scene day, don't go into work. Leave everything behind, leave your inhibitions, leave your responsibilities outside, that you have to be fully committed to this. But I'd like to say this at the end of all this, after having a really in-depth conversation with Dr. Ramsland, particularly in this case, and we've had quite a few, but I was very inspired by having this session with you all tonight, because I want you to see that it's so important how together as a team, we come together. We all have something to give to it, be willing to let people offer their expertise into helping solve the case. And again, we seek the truth here. That's what we do. We seek the truth. I can't say we always get justice, but we're here to seek the truth. So we come together nicely at the end of the day, and can complement one another and do what we have to seek the truth and hopefully into solving investigations. So thank you for that tonight.
Thank you, both of you. What a beautiful blend. Two different kinds of ways of looking at this, and you gave us both like such a well-rounded presentation. We are deeply, deeply grateful. You're going to be getting a lot of emails. I know you're going to get an email from Marie Ann Raguso, Dr. Ramsland, and both Professor Plotkin and Dr. Ramsland are probably going to be getting an email from Sheriff Gregory Tony very, very soon. And so we could talk about that. We could talk about that off screen, but I know that that's going to happen. So he's very interested in having you come and present for his deputies. Anyway, thank you so much to both of you for giving your time. We went over a little bit. I hope that that's all right with all of the viewers. I want to thank my deans. I have to thank Dean Dr. Kimberly Durham, Dr. Tammy Kushner, Dr. Marcelo Castro. These are the deans of the College of Education School of Criminal Justice. And without their support, we would not have programs like this. So thank you both again.
Thank you.
Very excited. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure. And everybody be safe. Situational awareness, very important.
Be safe and stay healthy.
Yes.